The supermarket was calm that afternoon, the kind of quiet that made it easy to blend in. That was exactly what Colonel Emma Brooks wanted, a moment of peace away from the rigid discipline of military life. Dressed in a simple white shirt, jeans, and sneakers, she looked like just another shopper browsing the aisles. But Emma had spent a lifetime in high-stakes situations. Years of leading soldiers, making split-second decisions, and upholding the values of discipline and accountability. Even in a place as ordinary as a supermarket, those instincts never left her. She reached for a carton of milk when a sudden thud broke the quiet. A few feet away, a tall man in a police uniform stood at the end of the aisle. Officer Paul Smith. He had just dropped a pack of noodles and a bottle of soda onto the floor. And then, without a glance, without hesitation, he turned and walked away. Emma narrowed her eyes. She didn't like disorder. She didn't like carelessness. And she especially didn't like people who ignored their responsibilities. She stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Sir, you should pick that up." Paul stopped in his tracks. For a moment, he didn't turn around. Then, slowly, he pivoted, his gaze sweeping over Emma with thinly veiled contempt. "Excuse me?" His voice carried the weight of arrogance, as if the mere suggestion offended him. Emma held her ground, her expression unwavering. "You dropped something. You should pick it up." Paul's lip curled into a smirk. He gave a small, dismissive chuckle like she had just said something ridiculous. Like she was ridiculous. "You really think it's your place to tell me what to do?" He sneered. Emma didn't flinch. "It's about responsibility. Setting an example. You wear that uniform to serve this community, don't you?" Paul's expression darkened, his shoulders squared, making himself look even bigger, as if his size and badge would intimidate her into silence. "This isn't the military, sweetheart," he said, voice dripping with mockery. "I don't answer to you." Emma exhaled slowly. She had faced war zones. She had stood in briefing rooms with generals debating life and death strategies. And yet, in that moment, she knew exactly what she was dealing with. A man drunk on authority, mistaking his uniform for untouchable power. A few shoppers nearby had started to take notice, their quiet glances turning toward the unfolding confrontation. Paul saw it too. And instead of backing down, he leaned in closer, his voice dropping into something low and dangerous. "You want to lecture me about my job? I suggest you walk away before you regret it." Emma's eyes didn't waver, because what Paul Smith didn't know, what he couldn't even begin to imagine, was that she had spent her entire life not walking away. The smirk on Officer Paul Smith's face widened, his confidence swelling with every second that passed. He saw no threat in the woman standing before him, just another civilian who didn't know her place. He scoffed, shaking his head. "You really don't know when to quit, do you?" Emma Brooks remained unmoved. Her posture was steady, her expression unreadable, the same way it had been in war rooms and combat zones. She had seen men like him before, entitled, arrogant, convinced their authority made them untouchable. "This isn't about me," she said, her voice level. "It's about your responsibility. Your uniform represents something bigger than you." Paul let out a mocking laugh, looking around as if expecting the other shoppers to share in his amusement. Some glanced away uncomfortably. Others, however, weren't so quick to turn their backs. The confrontation had drawn attention, and Paul didn't like being challenged, especially not in public. He stepped closer, arms crossed over his broad chest. "You think you can tell me how to do my job?" His voice was dripping with condescension, his words slow, deliberate, like he was speaking to a child. "Newsflash, sweetheart, I don't need a lecture from some—" He hesitated just for a second before the insult slipped out. "Some angry woman trying to prove a point." The air shifted. A low murmur rippled through the supermarket, a few gasps, a couple of people whispering. Emma didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't stiffen, didn't let the words affect her in any visible way. But inside, she had just confirmed exactly the kind of man she was dealing with. She had encountered men like him before, ones who wielded their authority like a weapon, ones who believed respect was something owed to them rather than earned. She inhaled slowly. "This isn't about me," she repeated, her voice controlled. "It's about you, and your actions, they will have consequences. Not just for me, but for you." Paul chuckled. Then he laughed. A full-bodied, dismissive laugh, shaking his head like the idea of being held accountable was the funniest thing he had ever heard. "Oh yeah," he said, his grin sharp. And just who is going to hold me accountable? His badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and for a moment he truly believed it made him invincible. Emma just stared at him, because he had no idea who he was talking to. Not yet. The smirk on Officer Paul Smith's face twisted into something uglier. Frustration. Emma Brooks wasn't reacting the way he wanted. She wasn't flustered. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't scared. Most people folded when confronted by authority, especially when that authority came in a uniform and a gun. They stammered, backed down, gave some half-hearted excuse just to escape the moment. But not her. Paul could feel the heat rising in his chest, that all-too-familiar itch of control slipping through his fingers. He had expected her to look away, to show even the slightest hesitation. Instead, she stood there, her posture unshaken, her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that unnerved him. Who the hell does she think she is? His pulse quickened. And then, without thinking, without reason, he made the worst mistake of his career. His hand dropped to his holster. The second his fingers curled around the grip of his gun, the entire store shifted. A sharp, collective gasp rippled through the aisles. A woman near the checkout pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. A man instinctively pulled his daughter closer, his arm tightening protectively around her shoulders. Somewhere behind him, there was the metallic clatter of a shopping basket hitting the floor, and then the glow of phone screens. At least 4 shoppers lifted their devices, recording. Some shaky, some held with frozen fingers, but all capturing the exact same moment. The moment a police officer reached for his weapon over a conversation. Emma saw everything. She saw the way his nostrils flared, the way his breathing turned shallow, the way his pupils shrank when he realized what he had just done. But most importantly, she saw the fear, not in her, in him. She had been in situations like this before. She had stood in war zones, her boots planted in sand and blood, staring down men with actual power, men who knew how to kill, not just pretend to be dangerous. And yet, here was Paul Smith, an overcompensating bully, acting like a man who had never faced a real fight in his life. She took a step forward. Slow. Deliberate. The distance between them shrunk, not enough to be a threat, but just enough to make him feel exposed. Her voice, when it came, was ice cold. Are you seriously threatening me with a firearm over a conversation? The words cut through the silence like a blade. Paul froze. His fingers twitched against the gun grip, as if his brain had just caught up with what his body had done. His eyes flickered, darting from Emma to the phones pointed at him to the crowd of witnesses now watching his every breath. And that's when it hit him. He had screwed up. Badly. Emma saw it. The second realization crashed into him like a freight train. He wasn't in control anymore. He had just given all of it away. The air inside the supermarket had completely shifted. What had started as a routine shopping trip had turned into a full-blown public confrontation. And now? Now it was something far bigger than that. Officer Paul Smith's fingers still hovered near his holstered gun, but they were no longer steady. There was a slight tremor in his hand, one that he was desperately trying to suppress. His face had lost its color, and for the first time since this entire exchange began, he wasn't sure what to do next. The crowd had grown larger, and with it the number of recording phones. What started as a few cautious glances had turned into a full audience, witnesses, all watching, all capturing his biggest mistake in real time. But the real problem for him? Emma wasn't scared. She wasn't backing down. She was standing there like she had already won. And in a way, she had, because no matter what Paul did next, he had already lost. Emma's posture was unshaken, her hands calm as she reached into her pocket. Not fast, not frantic, but slow and deliberate. Controlled. Because unlike him, she didn't panic under pressure. Paul's eyes flickered, darting between Emma's hand and the crowd. His fingers twitched near his holster again, but he didn't draw. He wouldn't. Not now. Not with this many witnesses. Emma saw the exact moment it hit him. This wasn't just an argument anymore. This wasn't just him flexing his authority over a civilian. This was career-ending, and it was about to get worse. She pulled out her phone and, without breaking eye contact, dialed. Paul went pale. The second her thumb pressed the call button, it was over. Emma's voice was cold, sharp, and unshakable, each word carrying the weight of absolute certainty. I have a police officer brandishing a weapon at me in a public space. Send immediate support. The crowd stirred, and the tension snapped like a live wire. More people started talking. The murmurs turned into real voices, voices of anger, disbelief, people demanding answers. A woman near the produce section clutched her purse to her chest, shaking her head in disgust. A man near the checkout stand stepped forward slightly, his stance shifting like he was ready to intervene if needed. A store employee, a young guy, maybe early 20s, bolted toward the front entrance, his shoes squeaking against the tile. He wasn't just getting security. He was making sure everyone outside knew what was happening inside. Emma didn't move, didn't say another word. She just watched. Watched as Paul's eyes widened, as his mouth opened slightly like he wanted to defend himself, but nothing came out. Because what could he say? He knew exactly how bad this looked, how bad it was. And then sirens, distant at first, barely audible, but growing louder by the second. The entire store seemed to freeze. Paul stiffened. His head snapped toward the entrance, pupils dilating. The cavalry was coming. And this time, they weren't coming for Emma. They were coming for him. The sirens grew deafening as multiple police cars screeched to a halt outside the supermarket. Doors flew open. Officers rushed inside. The crowd parted, clearing the path for the incoming storm. Uniformed officers flooded the space, their eyes scanning the scene, taking in Paul Smith frozen near his holster, the sea of phones still recording, and Emma Brooks standing tall, unshaken. And then the chief of police walked in. Behind him, in a sharp navy blue suit, came the mayor of Austin. The second Paul saw them, he knew he was finished. His arrogance faltered, his chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. He had spent the last 5 minutes convincing himself this was salvageable, that maybe he could talk his way out, twist the narrative, make it seem like this was all some ridiculous overreaction. But not anymore. Not with them here. The chief of police, a grizzled veteran with years of experience handling public scandals, took one long look at the crowd, the cameras, the scene before him. Then slowly his gaze landed on Paul. And it was not a look of support. The supermarket was dead silent. Paul cleared his throat, attempting to regain control. "Chief, sir, this is..." The chief held up a single hand, silencing him instantly. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, they burned with disgust. The mayor stepped forward next, clasping his hands in front of him. His voice when he spoke was calm, steady, but laced with an unmistakable edge. "Officer Paul Smith," he said. "I've watched the footage, every second of it." Paul tensed. The crowd murmured. The phones were still rolling, every angle capturing the exact moment Paul's career came crashing down. "You have disgraced this uniform." The mayor's words were final, unforgiving. "Effective immediately. You are stripped of your badge." A sharp collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Paul's face drained of color. His mouth opened, but no words came. 2 officers stepped forward. One of them reached for Paul's duty belt, unbuckling it with cold precision, removing the holstered weapon from his side. Another unpinned the badge from his chest. The weight of everything hit Paul at once. The reality. The finality. His breath hitched. His shoulders slumped. His fingers twitched slightly at his sides like he wanted to grab the badge back, to undo this. But there was no undoing this. Emma didn't move. She didn't need to. She had already won. Paul had spent the last 10 minutes dismissing her, mocking her, trying to make her feel small. And now she stood tall while he fell apart. The chief exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple before locking eyes with Paul. "Turn in your uniform by the end of the day." Paul barely nodded. The officers stepped back, holding his gun and badge, the 2 things he thought made him untouchable. And now he had nothing. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, the story had spread like wildfire. The supermarket's security footage, combined with dozens of phone recordings, flooded social media. News stations picked it up. Headlines screamed his name. Austin officer stripped of badge after pulling gun on Army colonel. Corrupt cop exposed, caught on camera abusing his authority. Heroic military officer stands against police misconduct. The world saw everything. Paul Smith had spent years hiding behind his badge, intimidating people, using his uniform as a shield. But now, there was nowhere left to hide. And as the news spread, so did something else, the voices of his past victims. One by one, they came forward. A black teenager arrested for loitering in front of his own apartment building. A single mother, harassed during a traffic stop, and threatened with arrest when she asked too many questions. An elderly man, fined for a non-existent violation, humiliated when he dared to argue. Case after case, story after story. Paul wasn't just losing his job, he was facing an investigation, criminal charges, a lawsuit. And worst of all, the public knew his name. The same way he had once puffed out his chest, demanding fear and respect, now he couldn't even step outside without cameras flashing in his face. His disgrace was complete. Emma Brooks, meanwhile, didn't seek recognition. She didn't post about it, didn't give interviews. She wasn't interested in attention. She had spent her life fighting for something bigger than herself. But people noticed her anyway. She became an unintentional symbol, proof that power could be challenged, that authority wasn't above accountability. Strangers called her a hero. Soldiers who had served under her weren't surprised. They already knew who she was. The world was watching. But Emma? She was already moving forward. She adjusted the strap of her bag, took a deep breath, and walked out of the supermarket into the sunlight. Because at the end of the day, she had just done what she always did. She stood her ground. And this time, it changed everything.